My name is James Parker. I'm 22 years old. And this is the story of how my own family tried to bury my future, and how I rose from the ashes to build a legacy they could never touch. The morning my entire world came crashing down started like any other. I had a checklist in hand, my suitcase packed neatly in the corner of my room, and my scholarship documents laid out on the desk with obsessive precision. Everything was ready for my flight to Paris. A full-ride opportunity to study international diplomacy at one of the most prestigious policy institutions in the world. Something I had worked toward in silence for over a year. I didn't tell anyone because I knew how they'd react. Still, I'd made one mistake. I left my passport in the folder on my desk overnight. I thought it would be fine. I thought wrong. When I woke up that morning and checked the folder, it was gone. Not just misplaced. Not moved. Gone. Like it had vanished into thin air. I tore through every drawer. Emptied my backpack. Lifted the mattress. Nothing. My hands shook. My throat went dry. I just knew, this wasn't an accident. And then I heard her. Emily. Leaning against my doorway like she owned the air I breathed, my younger sister twirled a strand of perfect blonde hair around her finger and smiled with that soft, almost sympathetic tone she used when she wanted to cut you and watch you bleed. Maybe this is a sign, James, she said. Not everyone's meant to live abroad. Some of us are better off close to home. With family. I stood frozen. Her words wrapped themselves around my lungs like chains. You took it, I whispered. She shrugged. Don't be paranoid. But I wasn't paranoid. I wasn't stupid either. This wasn't the first time something I loved had mysteriously disappeared. My senior year film portfolio? Deleted from my hard drive the night before college submissions. My volunteer hours? Accidentally and signed by the pastor after Emily told him I'd skipped church to party, which I hadn't. They called me the difficult one. The rebellious one. The son who never fit the image they wanted to display to the world. Emily, on the other hand, was perfect. The golden child. Youth leader. Honor student. The one who prayed the loudest, dressed the cleanest, smiled the brightest. She played the role so well that even I sometimes believed she was genuine. But behind that facade was someone who couldn't stand the idea of me succeeding where she hadn't. I stormed downstairs to confront my parents, my voice brittle with disbelief. My passport is gone. Someone took it. Mom looked up from her Bible, blinking slowly like I'd just asked her to explain the meaning of life. James, you always misplace things when you're stressed. Maybe this is God's way of telling you something. God's way? I echoed. Dad folded his arms, his face unreadable. Son, you're 22. Maybe it's time to stop chasing fantasies. This whole Paris thing sounds impulsive, dangerous, unnecessary. My hands clenched into fists. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I earned this. Why can't any of you just be happy for me? Emily walked into the room, resting her head on Mom's shoulder like some fragile dove. We are happy, James. We worry. You always make things harder than they have to be. You mean I don't roll over like I'm supposed to, I snapped. A long silence stretched through the room. Then Mom said it, words I will never forget. Maybe Emily's right. Maybe this is God's will. Not all doors are meant to open. That was the moment something in me broke. Not shattered. Not exploded. Just broke. Quietly. Cleanly. The kind of break that leaves a scar, not a wound. I went back to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed. And I cried not because I was weak, but because I was finally done hoping they would ever see me for who I really was. Then my phone buzzed. A single message from the only person in my life who had never treated me like a background character in Emily's spotlight. Plan Alpha is green. Backup passport ready. Car at 5 a.m. You in? It was from Noah, my best friend since 3rd grade, the guy who watched my family cut me down year after year and never once said, "You should forgive them." He knew better. I wiped my face, took a deep breath, and replied, "I'm in. Let's do this." Because if they wanted to block my exit, they'd have to learn something the hard way. You can only bury a seed so many times before it learns how to grow through concrete. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat by the window watching the house I had grown up in slowly go dark. One room at a time. First the kitchen, then the hallway, then Emily's. Though hers flickered back on around midnight, just long enough for her to film one of those perfect Instagram stories, the kind where she pretends to read scripture with a cup of peppermint tea and fairy lights behind her. It was all an illusion. Just like her concern. Just like their love. At 3:45 a.m., I moved into action. Every step I took was calculated. The third stair creaked. I skipped it. The security camera above the entryway, already disabled by a little trick Noah taught me 2 weeks earlier, looped footage. As far as the family knew, I never even left my room that night. I had everything I needed packed in an old army green backpack, the kind my dad used to sneer at because it wasn't monogrammed or appropriate for a Parker. That made it perfect. Hidden inside, my new passport, travel documents, printed scholarship confirmation, and a USB drive loaded with digital proof of every sabotage Emily had committed over the last 5 years. Yes, every single one. Because after my portfolio disappeared and Emily just so happened to be the last person in the computer lab, I started documenting everything. Backup cameras, hidden folders, screenshot logs. Not for revenge. At first, just insurance. But now, that insurance was about to pay off. At 4:48 a.m., I slipped out the side door. The cold October air hit my face like a baptism. Noah's SUV blinked once, parked beneath the maple tree at the end of the block. As I climbed in, he looked over at me. "You sure about this?" I stared straight ahead, jaw set. I've never been more sure of anything. We didn't say much on the way to the airport. Just a few nods. A playlist of old songs we used to listen to on road trips played low in the background. I was too focused, too alert to feel much. Until we hit the interstate and my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. Missed calls. Texts. All from the usual suspects. "Mom, James, please come back. We need to talk. As a family. Dad, you're throwing away your future for attention. Turn around. Emily, running away won't make you a man. It makes you a coward." I handed my phone to Noah. "Record this." He raised an eyebrow. "Right now?" I nodded. I unzipped my backpack, pulled out the USB, and connected it to his laptop. We had just passed exit 14, perfect timing. I took a deep breath and began speaking into the camera. "This is James Parker. For years, I've been called difficult, unstable, emotional. But the truth is, I just never played the game my family wanted me to play. They built a pedestal for my sister and buried everyone else beneath it. But I refused to be buried anymore." I clicked the first file. It was dated May 3rd. A grainy but clear clip of Emily bleaching my navy blue suit jacket the night before my senior award ceremony. Her face fully visible. Her laugh unmistakable. The next file? Her deleting emails from my laptop marked MIT summer program acceptance. She thought I wouldn't notice. File after file, sabotage after sabotage, all with timestamps, all irrefutable. When I finished, I looked into the camera. "I'm going to Paris today. I earned it. They tried to stop me, but I planned for that. So, if you're watching this, it means I made it. And now the truth does too." Noah uploaded the video to a private link. "Ready to go nuclear?" he asked. I hesitated for a beat, then nodded. "Post it to the family group chat. Church chat too. Oh, and send it to the scholarship committee. Let them know I made it out." He whistled low. "This is the kind of move that ends in documentaries." "Let them film it," I said. "But only after I graduate." The airport was quiet when we arrived. Still dark out. Still peaceful. But inside me, a storm raged. Not fear. Not regret. Just hunger. For something real. Something that was mine. Not Emily's leftover praise. Not Mom's conditional love. Mine. At the check-in counter, I handed over my passport and ticket. The agent looked up and smiled. First time to Paris? I exhaled, finally letting myself smile. First time going anywhere as myself. As I walked toward security, my phone buzzed one last time. Emily, you've ruined everything. You ungrateful traitor. Hope Paris is worth destroying your own family. I didn't respond. I didn't even flinch. Instead, I opened my notes app. Typed one sentence. Emily Parker is no longer the voice of this family. I am. Then I blocked her. As I stepped through the metal detectors and into the terminal, I felt it for the first time. Freedom. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even sweet. It was quiet. Solid. Like fresh air filling lungs that had never known oxygen. I was no longer James Parker, the family disappointment. I was just James. Future diplomat. Unshakable witness. Survivor of a well-dressed lie. Paris was waiting. And I was on my way. The flight to Paris was nearly 7 hours, but it felt like a lifetime in the best way possible. Somewhere over the Atlantic, watching the stars through the airplane window, it finally hit me. I was free. Not from a location. From a legacy. I wasn't carrying their names, their judgments, or their expectations with me anymore. I was just James. And James was starting over. The plane touched down at Charles de Gaulle just after 7 a.m. Paris time. Cool gray skies stretched overhead, but to me it felt like sunlight. No one here knew my sister. No one knew my parents. No one had ever watched me disappear behind someone else's halo. I was invisible in the right way. Blank slate invisible. I made it through customs easily, thanks to the pristine documentation I'd prepared. The officer didn't ask a single question, just stamped the passport and nodded. I wanted to cry right then and there, just from the fact that no one was trying to hold me back anymore. My life was no longer something I had to defend. I checked into my student housing just before noon, modest but charming, with ivy crawling up the stone walls and an ancient wooden staircase that creaked when you walked too fast. Room 4B. Mine. As soon as I stepped inside, I closed the door and leaned against it. Silence. Real silence. No Emily rehearsing her speeches for church fundraisers. No Mom praying a little too loudly that I would find direction. Just peace. And yet, it didn't take long for the past to follow me. The group chat notifications began again. This time, not from my family, but from people back home. Noah had posted the video exactly as planned. And it had detonated like a grenade in a glass house. First came the replies from old classmates. Bro, I always knew Emily was shady, but this. Finally, someone called the Parkers out. About time. James, you just exposed the entire suburban Hunger Games. Then came messages from people I barely remembered. Neighbors, teachers, church acquaintances. James, we had no idea. I'm so sorry. I believed what they said about you. I was wrong. Your story matters. Thank you for telling the truth. My inbox was a landslide of validation, support, and, most surprising, regret. The same people who once looked through me were now seeing me for the first time. But the Parker family? They went dark. No posts. No replies. No damage control. Just silence. And that was louder than any statement they could have made. Until Emily cracked. She uploaded a video just 2 days after my departure. I didn't watch it live. I refused. But Noah summarized it perfectly. She's crying. Said you exaggerated. Blamed the bleach on stress. Claimed she deleted your files because she thought they were outdated versions. Says she loves you, just didn't know how to show it. I laughed. It was a bitter, humorless sound. Of course she did. Of course she performed remorse like it was just another church recital. The comments, though, weren't buying it. So, you accidentally sabotaged him for 5 years? Your tears don't match the evidence. You've been the golden child for so long you forgot what real accountability looks like. By the end of the day, she deleted the video. Again. I should have felt triumphant. And maybe part of me did. But most of me just felt tired. Tired of the drama. Tired of being forced to prove my own pain just to be believed. I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted peace. But life wasn't done handing out consequences yet. 3 days later, I got a message from an old friend at Emmanuel Church. James, they suspended Emily from her youth leader role, and your mom hasn't shown her face in service since your video dropped. I stared at the message for a long time. I hadn't asked for that. I hadn't even hoped for it. But still, it felt inevitable. You can only polish glass so many times before it shatters. Meanwhile, my new life in Paris began to blossom. Orientation week at the Global Policy Institute was intense but exhilarating. Every student had a story, a different accent, a different fight. And for once, I wasn't the only underdog in the room. We weren't competing for attention. We were building something bigger than ourselves. I met people from Ghana, India, Sweden, Peru. Activists, scholars, survivors. And slowly, the voice I had hidden for so long began to rise. Not in anger, not in defense, just in truth. 1 week into the program, we were asked to give 5-minute introductions about what brought us here. When it was my turn, I walked to the podium. My palms were sweaty, my breath shallow. But I didn't flinch. I'm James Parker, I began. And I was never supposed to be here. They listened. They leaned in. And I told them, not about the sabotage, not about the bleach, or the emails, or the suitcase with the fake zipper lining. I told them about a boy who was taught that shrinking himself was the price of love. And who chose, finally, to stop paying it. When I finished, the room was silent. Then, applause. Not polite. Not obligatory. Honest. The professor smiled. That was not just brave. It was necessary. That moment changed everything. Later that night, I received an email. One of the panel leaders had recommended me for a student ambassador role representing the U.S. cohort at the upcoming policy forum in Geneva. Geneva. Another door. Another beginning. No Emily. No interference. Just me. And it was only the start. The invitation to the Geneva Policy Forum came with a sense of surrealism I couldn't quite put into words. I'd spent most of my life being told I was too impulsive, too sensitive, too ungrateful. Now I was being asked to represent the entire U.S. student delegation in one of the most influential diplomatic stages in the world. I stood in front of the mirror in my modest Paris dormitory, adjusting the collar of my shirt. I had no designer suit. No tailored blazer. Just a clean, pressed button-down shirt and the kind of focus that could slice through stone. And yet, before I left for Geneva, something unexpected found its way into my inbox. Subject line, from the Parker family. No names. Just those 3 words. The body of the email was short, cold, and unsigned. You've made your point, James. We're asking you not to bring the family name into any further public appearances. We've suffered enough embarrassment. It's time to let it go. Let it go. I reread that line again and again. Not a single word of apology. Not a drop of accountability. Just fear. Fear that the golden family narrative was falling apart, and I wasn't willing to hold it up anymore. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the email to Noah with a single line. They're still more worried about the name than the damage. He responded almost instantly. Typical. Let the name fall. Let it crumble. Geneva was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. The forum itself was held in a towering glass building that overlooked Lake Geneva, where the air carried a sharp, electrifying clarity that made you feel every breath mattered. I took the stage the second day. The topic, digital truth-telling and the collapse of constructed authority. I stood behind the podium, the crowd before me filled with students, ambassadors, NGO leaders, even a few journalists. Cameras lined the back wall. And I did what I'd spent years fearing to do. I told the truth, my whole truth. I grew up in a home that looked perfect on the outside. I began. Church every Sunday. Charity galas. Christmas cards that looked like movie stills. But beneath the shine was silence. A silence so loud it drowned everything else. And it was enforced by one rule. Don't speak if it makes us look bad. I saw heads nodding, eyes widening. I told them about Paris, about the fake repentance, about the sabotage and the whispers. But I learned something, I continued, that the moment you stop protecting the people who hurt you, your voice becomes dangerous. And once you start telling the truth, you realize it never needed to shout. It just needed to be heard. The standing ovation wasn't immediate. It was slow, rising like a wave of people who didn't know they needed to hear what I said until they heard it. And then came the headlines. Black sheep turned diplomat. James Parker's speech rattles the roots of generational control. Geneva Forum spotlights a new voice for silenced youth worldwide. It wasn't just about my family anymore. It was about every kid who'd been benched in their own home so their sibling could shine. Every dreamer who was told their ambition was a liability. Within days, I was contacted by 3 major publications, 2 advocacy organizations, and 1 political strategist who wanted to mentor me personally. But amidst the whirlwind, something else happened. Something I didn't expect. Emily emailed me directly. Subject: You were right. James, I watched your Geneva speech. Twice. The first time, I hated it. The second time, I cried. I don't know how to undo what I did. But I know this. I was wrong. And I'm sorry. Not for getting caught. Not because people turned on me. But because I let jealousy and fear ruin the only relationship that ever made me feel guilty. I won't ask you to forgive me. But I do want you to know I see you now. And I'm ashamed it took the world seeing you first for me to finally open my eyes. For a long time, I just stared at that email. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I didn't reply. Because for once, the silence wasn't mine to carry. It was hers. And yet, a part of me softened. Not out of obligation, but because for the first time in our lives, she had dropped the act. I saved the email. Not as a trophy, but as a timestamp. Proof that some things do change, even if they change too late. Back in Paris, I resumed classes. But now, professors asked for my thoughts in class. Students invited me to collaborate. I was no longer the boy who ran away. I was the young man who stepped out and never looked back. Then came the next letter. Not an email. Not a message. A formal letter on embossed paper. From the White House. They were hosting a Next Generation Leadership Forum in Washington, D.C., and they wanted me to speak. I sat in the corner of my dorm room, the letter trembling in my hands, as I realized. The boy they tried to bury had grown roots, bloomed, and now the entire world was watching. They couldn't erase me anymore. They could only watch. The letter from the White House sat on my desk for nearly 2 hours before I moved. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I knew exactly what it meant. It meant they couldn't pretend anymore. They couldn't spin it, dilute it, or shove it into a shoebox labeled family misunderstanding. The world was listening. The world was responding. And the one they once called the difficult son had become the nation's new symbol of defiance and dignity. The Next Generation Leadership Forum was scheduled for late spring. I was to be one of 6 keynote speakers, joining representatives from across industries, tech, education, diplomacy. I wasn't famous. I wasn't wealthy. I didn't carry a last name that opened doors. But my voice had found its way through the cracks. And it was echoing louder than theirs ever did. Noah called as soon as the news broke. His voice was part awe, part brotherly pride. James, you're going to be standing on a stage where presidents have spoken. I know, I said quietly. You're the story now. And for once, I believed it. The weeks leading up to the DC Forum flew by in a blur. I juggled classes, press interviews, and speaking engagements across Europe. My inbox exploded with invitations from universities asking me to guest lecture on modern activism, resilience, and something I never imagined I'd be known for: family-induced invisibility. I had unintentionally become a face for everyone who'd been sidelined by the ones who were supposed to uplift them. Still, amidst the whirlwind, the Parker name lingered. Not in my mouth, but in the mouths of others. 1 week before the Washington event, a student journalist from a major Ivy League paper interviewed me. She asked, "What would you say to your parents if they were in the audience?" I didn't blink. "I'd thank them," I said, "for teaching me that sometimes your biggest breakthroughs are born from the walls people build around you." The quote went viral. Not because it was petty, but because it was true. Washington was hot and humming the morning I arrived. Secret Service agents, polished shoes, tight schedules. I wore the same black suit Noah had helped me pick out back in Paris. It wasn't expensive, but it fit. And I carried myself differently now, not stiff with fear, but steady with clarity. Inside the Eisenhower Executive Office building, I waited backstage with 5 other speakers. All older than me. All brilliant. The program director leaned in and whispered, "James, you'll be last. We want to close with your story." I nodded, heart pounding. And then it was time. I stepped onto the stage. Hundreds of eyes watched. Cameras rolled. And somewhere, whether in a quiet Boston suburb or a closed church office, I knew my family was watching, too. I stood at the podium and took a long breath. My name is James Parker. I come from a family that looks perfect on paper. But sometimes, perfection is the loudest mask silence ever wore. I paused. They told me I was ungrateful, difficult, rebellious. All because I didn't accept being the shadow. All because I dared to want more than proximity to someone else's success. I saw heads nodding, some eyes blinking harder than usual. But what I've learned, I continued, is that breaking away from control doesn't mean breaking your family. It means breaking the cycle. I didn't want revenge. I wanted space to breathe. And when I finally stepped into that space, I realized something powerful. You don't have to be remembered by those who refuse to see you to still leave a legacy. Applause burst like thunder. That night, news outlets across the country ran the headline. From Invisible Sun to National Voiced James Parker leaves DC stage in standing ovation. I thought that would be the end of it, the high point, the final curtain. But I was wrong. 2 days after the forum, I received a package. No return address. Inside, a single envelope, handwritten in a familiar, tight cursive. From Linda Parker, my mother. James, we didn't understand. We didn't try. That's our greatest failure, not just as parents, but as people of faith. We confused silence with respect, control with care, and image with love. I watched you speak. And, for the first time, I didn't feel shame. I felt awe. I hope one day you'll allow us to know you again, not the son we thought we were raising, but the man you became in spite of us. Love. Mom. It should have cracked me open. But it didn't. I wasn't the boy needing permission anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't crumble. I smiled. Gently. Not because they deserved it, but because I had finally freed myself from needing it. Forgiveness? Maybe one day. But approval? Never again. When I returned to Paris, something had changed in me. I wasn't walking through ivy-covered archways as the boy who escaped. I was walking as the man who transformed. I launched a platform called Unseen Voices, a global initiative to support young people buried beneath family legacies, cultural expectations, or religious guilt. We created workshops, peer circles, emergency resources, a space where being too much was finally just enough. In the first week, over 10,000 young people signed up. One message read, "I used to think it was just me. Then I watched your speech. Now I know it was never about being unworthy. It was about being unheard." Every night, I'd read messages from strangers who felt like siblings. And I realized I hadn't just broken free from my family's shadow. I had become the light others were now walking toward. They say the most powerful revolutions don't start in grand halls or with fiery speeches. They begin in silence, when one person dares to break it. By the time summer arrived in Paris, Unseen voices had spread like wildfire. What started as a safe space for silenced youth had become a full-fledged movement. Universities invited me to speak. Mental health nonprofits partnered with us. Even local governments in France and Canada asked for training modules to help identify toxic family dynamics masquerading as discipline. I wasn't just telling my story anymore, I was helping others write theirs. But the past has a way of knocking, even when the doors are locked. It came one evening, just before I was set to present at the United Nations Youth Forum in Geneva for the second time. My assistant, Clara, handed me a thin envelope. It wasn't the usual request or invitation. It had no postage, just a name in careful script. Emily Parker. I held it like it might burn. For a moment, I considered tossing it in the trash unopened. But something made me sit down. Something made me read. James, this isn't a press stunt. It's not for public redemption. This is for you, because I owe you the kind of apology I never thought I'd be brave enough to give. I was the favorite. I knew it. I played the part. And every time you came close to shining, I panicked. Not because you were stealing from me, but because I knew, deep down, you deserved it more. I sabotaged you because I didn't believe I had anything real of my own. You were always kind, always brilliant, always too good to live in our house of mirrors. And I hated you for it. I told myself you were arrogant, ungrateful, selfish. But the truth is, I was scared that if you left, the rest of us would have to face who we really were without you. And you did leave. And we did have to face it. And I broke. But breaking made me see. I've stepped down from everything. The church, the charity boards. I've started therapy. I'm working at a community center now, cleaning floors and stocking food shelves. It's the first thing I've done that no one's clapped for. And it feels real. You don't have to forgive me, James. But I needed you to know. I finally stopped performing. And that's because you stopped letting me script your life. Thank you, Emily. I read it twice. Then a third time. And for the first time since I boarded that plane out of Boston, I didn't feel anger. I felt grief. For what we could have been. For the childhood we never had. For the brother-sister bond that got buried under expectations and ego. I didn't reply. Not because I couldn't. But because some things deserve to sit in the silence they created. Instead, I packed my notes for Geneva. And when I stepped onto that stage the next day, I told a new story, not of betrayal, but of becoming. I was raised to believe that obedience was a virtue, I said. That love meant compliance. That loyalty meant silence. But silence is not peace. And love does not demand your disappearance. The audience, rows of diplomats, youth leaders, activists, sat still, breath held. My family didn't break me. They revealed me. Every attempt to dim my light only made me burn hotter. And every locked door they slammed made me look for new ones until I realized I could build my own. The applause that followed was thunderous. But this time, I didn't cry backstage. I didn't shake. I just exhaled, a man who had learned to carry his past without being crushed by it. Later that night, in my hotel room overlooking the water, I received a text from Noah. They're starting to call you the voice of the unseen. Just thought you should know. I replied simply, let them call me what they want. I know who I am now. That same week, Unseen Voices received a grant from a global nonprofit to expand into 5 more countries. Within a month, we had hubs in Cape Town, Sao Paulo, Bangkok, and Toronto. Young people everywhere were stepping forward, sharing stories, organizing change. It was beautiful, but it was also sobering. Because for every Evelyn, every James, every Lily or Amir, there were millions more still hiding, still scared, still unheard. And we were just getting started. Then came the call. I was alone in the office, the Eiffel Tower glowing in the distance behind me when my phone rang with a blocked number. I hesitated, then answered. James Parker. Yes, this is Karen Reynolds. I represent the Global Council for Emerging Leaders. We've been following your work closely. We'd like to nominate you for the 2025 Global Impact Award in the Youth Advocacy category." For a moment, I couldn't speak. We believe your voice is reshaping how institutions understand youth resilience and family dynamics. Your courage to stand alone has helped thousands stand up. After I hung up, I didn't celebrate. I didn't post. I just sat in the quiet and smiled, because once they told me I wasn't built for the world. Now the world was listening. And Emily? She never reached out again. But I received one final note months later from an anonymous email. "You lived." And that helped me stop pretending. That's all I ever needed from you. No signature. No name. But I knew. And for once, that was enough. The night of the 2025 Global Impact Awards, Paris shimmered with quiet anticipation. Dressed in a simple dark suit, I stood before the mirror, straightening my tie, thinking not about the award, but about the boy who once had to hide his dreams under floorboards to protect them from the people who were supposed to nurture them. That boy was gone. In his place stood a man who no longer needed anyone's permission to exist. When I arrived at the venue, an opulent hall along the Seine, I was greeted by young activists from around the world. Some were barefoot kids from villages who'd built solar projects in their towns. Others were survivors of war, of poverty, of silence. All of them had fought for a voice. And I was one of them. No longer the Parker family's second son. No longer the boy labeled difficult. Just James. They called my name late in the evening. I walked to the stage under a spotlight that once would have terrified me. But now? It felt like sunlight. The presenters smiled. For turning family betrayal into global advocacy, for giving voice to the unseen, the 2025 Youth Impact Award goes to James Parker. Applause thundered. But I didn't hear it. My ears buzzed with something deeper. Recognition, yes. But more than that, release. I took the microphone and began slowly. I was raised in a house of silence. I was taught that love was something you had to earn. That success was prideful. That obedience was the highest virtue. I scanned the crowd, locking eyes with strangers who looked like versions of me. But the truth is, love doesn't punish. Love doesn't ask you to shrink. And dreams, no matter how small, deserve protection, not sabotage. I paused, the words catching in my throat. I forgave them, I added, softly. Not because they deserved it, but because I did. I forgave them so I could stop carrying the cage they built. The room was still. Some were crying. Others just nodded, holding on to something they hadn't known they needed. "I'm not the hero of this story." "You are," I said, motioning to the crowd. "Every person who's ever been told, stay quiet, know your place, don't embarrass the family, this award belongs to you. May you never shrink again." The ovation was long, loud, and whole. Back in my room that night, I removed the small gold plaque from its velvet box and placed it beside a photo I kept tucked away for years, a faded picture of me at age 11, sitting at the dinner table, watching Emily open yet another award while I held a perfect report card no one asked to see. That boy wasn't invisible anymore. He had become a lighthouse. The months that followed were filled with new beginnings. Unseen Voices was awarded a UN partnership grant. I was asked to write a memoir. I became a mentor for students who had been labeled black sheep or lost causes. And slowly, the world began to understand. Being rejected by your family doesn't make you broken. Sometimes, it makes you unstoppable. I returned to Boston quietly one autumn afternoon. Not to reconcile, but to visit Noah and his newborn daughter. Her name was Grace. We sat on his porch, drinking coffee as maple leaves drifted down around us. "She's going to grow up in a different world," he said. "Because people like you dared to speak." I looked at Grace, so small, so perfect. And I smiled. "I didn't speak to be heard," I said. "I spoke so the next kid wouldn't have to beg for it." The final closure came in an unexpected form, a handwritten letter from my father. "James, we failed you." No other way to say it. I led our home with pride instead of listening. I confused image with integrity. And I let your sister's shine blind me from your quiet strength. We've lost your trust. I don't expect it back. But I want you to know your mother and I see you now. We don't deserve your forgiveness. But we do hope you keep thriving. Even if it's without us. With regret and hope. Dad. I sat with that letter for a long time. Then I placed it into a drawer next to Emily's apology, my White House invitation, and that first acceptance letter to Paris. Not as trophies, but as markers of a journey that began with erasure and ended with emergence. The following year, I stood on the TED Global stage. Thousands in the audience. Millions online. I began with the words I once whispered in my childhood bedroom, alone and unheard. I was never the problem. I was just inconvenient to a narrative that required me to stay small. I spoke of transformation, of toxic loyalty, of reclaiming your voice. But most importantly, I spoke of the freedom that comes when you stop trying to be loved by people who only accept you in fragments. The screen behind me lit up with my name and a single phrase. From silenced son to global voice. And that was the truth. Because the black sheep they tried to exile had become a shepherd for the forgotten, the silenced, the underestimated. And I wasn't done. Not even close. James's story is a reminder that true freedom isn't just escaping your past, it's refusing to be defined by it. Sometimes, the greatest act of rebellion is simply living well. You don't need their approval to rise, you just need to believe that your voice matters. What did you think of James's journey? Share your story or thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to Revenge Echoes for more real, raw, and unforgettable stories of transformation and poetic justice.